So after putting in a lot of thought about it, I realized that there was a way to map the situation in the DMT space. And what it is it's this. When you burst into that space, it seems like the most alien thing you have ever encountered. It is, in fact, the most alien thing you have ever encountered. It completely exceeds expectation. And yet, on another level, it is an effort on the part of something to come toward you from a great, great distance. And the map that seems most applicable to what it is it's a playpen. It's a receiving area. It's somebody very strange. It's their idea of what would make a human being feel comfortable and reassured. I saw Ralph Metzner on Thursday night, and he and Kathy have a wonderful new child, Sophia. And so there was Sophia lying in her bassinet, and suspended above her head were these shiny plastic objects in bright primary colors, which a series of geared mechanisms keep in motion. And so she's just lying there looking at this thing. That's what this DMT receiving area is for us. It is it's a place designed to accelerate our learning, reassure us, make us feel comfortable, and amuse us. And these things, which would shatter the sciences of Earth if they could be brought through from this other dimension, are the equivalent of rattles, spin-arounds, and colored blocks. I mean, they are the simplest objects imaginable in that other world. Well, it would not be, I suppose, such big news to wrap a wrap like this if, I were swathed in orange robes and had just flew in from Bangalore and had my world-girdling organization behind me, because you would just assume that I was an advanced being and that this was reportage from a world that you would never have anything to do with. But the fact is, everyone in this room, or most people in this room, are capable of this experience. I went into, nobody was more hard-boiled than I. I mean, I was an existentialist in the Sartrean mold. And it didn't keep the elves from approaching me. So I have been concerned to inform UFO people, Jungian psychologists, spiritual seekers, that this tremendously powerful tool lies present at hand. Curiosity pushed far enough will hit the jackpot. The world is not as we suppose. The great thing, you see, about DMT is that it settles certain questions assumed to be open. Like one question we all assume to be open is, well, is this the only universe or not? Answer, no. That settles that. Are there intelligent entities of a non-human sort? Answer, yes, there are. I don't know what they have to do with busted up barley fields in England or, Whitley Strieber's problems, but inside this drug, inside this plant compound, there are entities. And they are not oblivious to us. They're not flatworms or pelicans. They are intelligent. They are of the same class of being as we are, an intelligent being. Okay, well then there are questions, some of which I mentioned last night. Who are these people? Are they the dead? That would be big news. A drug that allows you to contact Aunt Minnie in the afterlife. I don't know how we would, this is National Enquirer stuff. What is the most parsimonious explanation that we can give? In other words, what is the simplest and least freaky explanation that we can give? Why should people see these little entities? Well, one idea that I've kicked around, because see, at heart I still am a reductionist, is that personality is actually fractal in some sense. It's self-similar. What does fractal mean? It means that any object which is made out of smaller versions of itself is fractal. So if you had a house made out of little houses, a good example is a fern. A fern is made out of little ferns, made out of still littler ferns, if you examine in and look at it. Many objects are like this. Is it possible that the personality is fractal? Jung made a lot of metaphorical statements about the behavior of the psyche based on the behavior of mercury, the liquid metal mercury, which was an object of fascination to the alchemists. And he said mercury is a perfect symbol, or it accepts the projections of the qualities of the psyche, because the psyche will always take the shape of its container, as a liquid does. Psyche is reflective, and in the same way that mercury is a mirrored surface, you never see Mercury, you see the reflections of the world around Mercury on its surface. And in the same way that if you have Mercury, I'm sure you all in the era of pre-toxic consciousness played with Mercury, you can take a ball of mercury and put your thumb down on it quickly, and it will break into little balls that will shoot in all directions. And each little ball will have a sub-reflection of the larger world in it. Well, is it possible that we could take the Jungian metaphor of the self as alchemical mercury and then say, well, what happens on DMT is the alchemical vessel is essentially hurled down in front of the experient, and the mercury of self shoots everywhere, and there are thousands of little versions of the self then ricocheting off the walls, some this big, some this big, some this big, some tiny. I confess that as much fun as it is to have this image, I'm not sure it provides an explanation. You have to have this experience to realize how resistant to explanation it's going to be. Well, then there are less parsimonious explanations that these entities, but still not going outside the human van. See, the first possibility was it's dead people. Those are still human beings. They just happen to be dead human beings. Then the second explanation was it's autonomous fragments of psychic mercury behaving as small portions of the self. Okay, we still haven't gone outside the human domain for an explanation. Okay, a third explanation is that this is some future state of humanity, that these things are actually, the reason they're like us but not like us is because we're seeing a human evolutionary form 1,000,000 years in the future or more, where finally, technology has been interiorized. The thing is, it's no longer even made of matter, still less of the body of an intelligent monkey. But nevertheless, it is somehow in our line, and we've just broken into the equivalent of a coaxial cable carrying time travel messages or something like that. Because there are reports on DMT of people bursting into spaces where the entities were extremely surprised and basically said, what the hell are you doing here? So is it that there is some kind of hyperdimensional matrix of communication that we dial in on, like primitives with a crystal radio who suddenly discover, that there's 250 UHF, VHF channels running around through every molecule? I don't know. The other possibility then is a non-human explanation. Now, the non-human explanation sets us up for nut country because, there's so many extraterrestrials haunting the supermarkets and trailer courts of Earth that nevertheless, science has never really fairly dealt with the question of human origins and the presence of human beings in the ecology of this planet. There is no doubt that if you're looking for the fingerprint of alien intervention in the biosystem of this planet, the presence of human beings is the major contender. I mean, we are not simply another kind of monkey. And the most reductionist people, when they attempt to explain how you move from a hominoid ape to a human being, use phrases like confluence of mysterious forces, as yet unelucidated factors, means they don't know. Missing links, they haven't the faintest idea. Here's a piece of data to chew over. The tripling of the human brain size in a period of 2 million years was the most rapid acceleration and transformation of an organ system of an animal in the history of the Earth. And this comes from this, that the tripling of the human brain size over 2 million years was the most rapid transformation of an animal organ in the whole history of evolution. And this comes from Edward O. Wilson, who, as you know, is the sociobiologist and the keeper of the flame of scientific rhetoric and purity. So, and he's pointing his finger at the problem for anybody trying to talk about the emergence of human beings out of the hominid apes. What drove this to happen so quickly, and obviously along certain very channelized lines? I mean, not human beings, but advanced hominids had been chipping stone and wandering around in Africa for a very, very long time, and culture was dull. It was dull. And then suddenly, 100,000 years ago, something took hold. Was it language? Was it fire? What was it? Well, we don't know. And nobody on the straight side of things has any reasonable explanation. I think that the Promethean fire that was brought to human beings, that gave us a leg up on the rest of creation, was a relationship with these psychoactive plants. And this doesn't get rid of the mystery, this intensifies the mystery. You see, we now can analyze what happened on many, many levels. Neurophysiological, at the level of the individual brain in contact with exogenous substances brought in from the biome in the form of foods. We can deal with the population genetics and mechanics of this kind of a confluence of factors. And then finally, at a higher level, you have to ask, why? Why does it take the form of a personified other? Well, the scenario that I've created to explain all this is basically an evolutionary scenario. I mentioned some of it last night. The planet undergoes successive cycles of wetness and drying. 30 million years ago, longer than we've been talking about, Africa was heavily forested from top to bottom. The world was warmer, and it was a climaxed forest ecology. Then, and these ape forms and primate forms proliferated and had an arboreal style of life where they were fruit eating, and they were social or gregarious, and they communicated through a very minimal language of signals. And they had binocular vision because they were insectivores. So they had the capacity to coordinate space very well because of living in the canopy environment. Under pressure of drying, the rainforest environment began to shrink. And when it did, these organisms, these animals, made their way into the grassland. And there they had to compete with other large mammals, ungulate mammals that were evolving there. Binocular vision was accelerated or really set in place. It wasn't so much in these early primates. There was the precondition for it. But for some reason, the eyes moved around the head, and the theory now is that bipedalism was basically an adaptation that allowed carrying. It was for carrying. It was because the style of these apes was to have a campsite. They carried nutrition back to a central site. And this gave them a leg up on competing hominids that were not able to take this erect position and free the hands. Well, this is the point. On the grasslands, in the presence of these ungulate animals, now bipedal, now binocular, this is the place where these mysterious, unelucidated factors raise their head, because it's right there that begins the cascade in the explosion of brain size.